He was disgusted by his obese daughter. So disgusted, he sold her to the Amish man who received a goddess. On a dusty street, under the toll of a church bell, a father shamed his only child before the town. With 1 silver coin, she was cast away like cattle. But when the Amish man reached out his hand, something no one expected began to unfold. Behind the quiet homestead walls, she found respect, even love. Yet in the shadows, a darker truth stirred. The girl held a hidden inheritance, a deed worth more than gold, and men would stop at nothing to take it. As railroad boots thunder and courtroom doors slam, her voice could mean the difference between disgrace and redemption. Was she truly just a burden to be discarded? Or was she the key to saving them all? Daughter, woman, goddess. And when the day of reckoning comes, will her courage be enough to break the chains of shame forever? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you. Make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The pale light of dawn crept through the threadbare curtains of the ranch house. Ruth Ann Miller stirred beneath her thin quilt, her heart already heavy with dread. The floorboards above her head creaked as her father's boots stamped across them. Each thump made her flinch. "Girl, get yourself up," his voice boomed down the stairs. "Ain't feeding no lazy mouth today." Ruth Ann pushed herself up from the narrow bed, her fingers trembling as she buttoned her faded blue dress. The mirror on her wall showed what she knew her father saw: a heavy-set young woman of 22, her brown hair pulled back in a simple braid. Her mother's kind eyes looked back at her, but they held shadows of hurt these days. The kitchen was cold when she entered. Her father stood by the stove, his face twisted in that familiar sneer. "Look at you," he spat, "big as a horse and twice as useless. You're a burden no man would want, girl. But that changes today." Ruth Ann's hands shook as she reached for the coffee pot. "Yes, Papa," she whispered, though confusion clouded her mind. What did he mean by that? By noon, she found herself jolting along in their wagon toward town. The spring air was crisp, but sweat dampened her neck. Her father hadn't spoken a word since they left, but his silence frightened her more than his usual harsh words. Main Street was crowded with wagons and horses. Farmers and ranchers from miles around had gathered for the monthly livestock auction. The familiar sounds of cattle lowing and sheep bleating filled the air. But her father steered their wagon past the animal pens, pulling up instead near the wooden auction platform. "Out," he ordered, grabbing her arm when she hesitated. Time to be rid of dead weight. Horror dawned as he dragged her toward the platform. Ruth Ann's legs went weak when she realized his intention. "Papa, please," she begged. "Don't do this." But he was already shoving her up the wooden steps. The auctioneer's eyes widened in shock, while whispers rippled through the gathering crowd. "Listen up," her father shouted. "Here stands a worthless girl who's eaten my food too long. Who'll take her off my hands?" Silence fell over the crowd. Ruth Ann wanted to sink through the wooden planks beneath her feet. Tears burned in her eyes as she saw Mrs. Henderson from the general store cover her mouth in shock. Young Tommy Peters, who delivered their mail, stared at his boots. "This ain't right, Miller," someone called out, but her father ignored them. "Going once," he bellowed. "Who'll rid me of this burden? $1 silver." The quiet voice cut through the murmurs. The crowd parted as a tall man in plain black clothing stepped forward. His beard was neatly trimmed, his broad-brimmed hat marking him as Amish. Ruth Ann had seen him occasionally in town. Vincent Yoder, who'd bought the old Peterson place last fall. $1 silver, he repeated firmly, meeting her father's gaze. More whispers rustled through the crowd. Ruth Ann's heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. Was she truly being sold like a cow or horse? Her father's laugh was bitter. "Done. She's yours, Yoder. Hope you don't regret your purchase." The sun was sinking toward the mountains when Vincent Yoder finally approached the platform. Ruth Ann hadn't moved, her legs frozen in place, as the crowd slowly dispersed. Many cast pitying glances her way, but none had dared intervene. "Miss Miller," Vincent said softly. He held out his hand to help her down. "Will you come with me? You need fear nothing." His voice was gentle, with none of the ownership she dreaded. When she hesitated, he added quietly, "You are a daughter of God, precious in His sight. No man can truly purchase what the Lord holds dear." Her father spat in the dust nearby. "She's your problem now, Yoder. I'm finally rid of her." He turned on his heel and stalked away, leaving Ruthann behind like so much unwanted baggage. The night was settling in as Vincent helped her into his wagon. Ruthann's hands trembled as she gripped the wooden seat. Fear filled her heart, despite his kindness. What would become of her now? The wagon creaked as Vincent climbed up beside her. He didn't speak immediately, allowing the silence to settle like a soft blanket. Finally, he clicked to his horse, and they started down the darkening street. Ruthann stared at her folded hands, her throat too tight for words. The day's humiliation burned fresh in her mind. Her own father had sold her for a silver dollar, declaring her worthless before the whole town. Though Vincent had shown her more dignity in the past hour than her father had in years, terror still fluttered in her chest like a trapped bird. The wagon rolled on through the gathering dusk, carrying her toward an uncertain future. The wagon wheels creaked softly as Vincent's horse plodded along the moonlit trail. Ruthann sat rigid on the wooden seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The evening air grew cooler, bringing with it the familiar scent of sage and pine from the surrounding hills. Crickets chirped their evening song, but otherwise silence wrapped around them like a heavy blanket. She stole glances at Vincent's profile, trying to read his intentions. His face remained calm, almost serene in the silver moonlight. Still, her heart raced whenever the wagon hit a bump, causing their shoulders to brush. She'd learned early that men's kindness often hid darker purposes. The moon had risen fully above the mountains when Vincent finally spoke. "You must be hungry." His voice was quiet, gentle as always. He reached beneath the seat and pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle. "It's simple fare, just bread and water. But you're welcome to it." Ruthann's trembling fingers accepted the offering. When was the last time someone had thought of her needs? "Thank you," she whispered. "In my faith," Vincent continued slowly, his eyes on the road ahead, "we believe that all souls are equal before God. Women are never property to be bought or sold." He paused, letting those words settle. "What happened today was wrong. I couldn't stand by and watch." The bread caught in her throat. "Then why?" She couldn't finish the question. Vincent's hands tightened on the reins. "I have a small homestead. Nothing fancy. Just 40 acres with a house and barn. I've managed alone this past year, but," he sighed, "I've been praying for companionship. Someone to help build a true home, maybe raise a family someday." His voice grew softer. "But only if that's what you want. You're free to go whenever you choose." Ruthann stared at her half-eaten bread, unable to speak. Freedom was a foreign concept after years of her father's control. The wagon turned onto a narrow lane, and soon a small farmhouse emerged from the darkness. Vincent helped her down, then gestured to the barn. "The loft is clean and warm. There's fresh hay and blankets. You can rest there tonight, safe and undisturbed." She climbed the ladder with shaking legs, finding a neat bed of sweet-smelling hay covered with wool blankets. Despite her fears, exhaustion soon pulled her into deep sleep. The next morning, roosters announced the dawn. Ruthann woke to the steady rhythm of an axe splitting wood. She peered through the loft door to see Vincent already at work, his plain black suspenders stark against his white shirt. When she climbed down, Vincent paused in his work. "Good morning," he said, wiping his brow. "I hope you slept well." She nodded, unable to meet his eyes in the bright morning light. "Let me show you around," he offered, setting aside the axe. The farmhouse was small but solid, with simple furnishings: a cook stove, a wooden table with 4 chairs, a few shelves lined with books. Everything was neat but obviously lacking a woman's touch. Through the window, she saw a vegetable patch where early spring peas climbed their poles. "It's not much," Vincent admitted, watching her face. "But with care, it could be a good home." Ruthann wrapped her arms around herself. "I don't know if I can. I'm not." She gestured helplessly at herself, her father's words echoing in her mind. Who would want someone like her? Vincent's expression grew serious. "Ruthann." He waited until she looked at him. "Kindness and a gentle spirit are worth far more than any outward beauty. I've seen how you treat others, helping Mrs. Henderson with her groceries, reading to the Peters children when their mother was sick. That's what matters." Tears sprang to her eyes, and she turned away quickly. That evening, Vincent prepared a simple supper of beans and cornbread, the kitchen filled with warm, homey smells that reminded Ruthann of happier times with her mother. As they ate in comfortable silence, The tears she'd been holding back all day finally spilled over. Vincent didn't try to stop her crying or offer empty comfort. He simply pushed his handkerchief across the table and waited, giving her the dignity of privacy in her grief. When her tears finally slowed, he spoke softly. "You need never fear me, Ruthann. Whatever you decide, you'll always be safe here." He met her gaze steadily. "You are not property. You are a child of God, and your worth is beyond measure." Ruthann clutched his handkerchief, overwhelmed that someone might see her as more than her father's shame. For the first time in years, a tiny spark of hope flickered in her heart. Dawn painted the Colorado sky in soft pinks and golds as Ruthann stepped out of the barn loft. The morning air held a crisp bite, making her pull her shawl tighter. She spotted the chicken coop and remembered Vincent's gentle suggestion that she might help with morning chores if she felt ready. Her hands trembled as she approached the coop. The hens clucked and shuffled, eyeing her warily. "It's all right," she whispered, reaching carefully under a plump red hen. Her fingers found warm eggs, and a small smile touched her lips as she gathered them in her apron. The wooden porch boards creaked beneath her feet as she swept away yesterday's dust. From inside the house came the familiar sounds of Vincent starting the cookstove. Taking a deep breath, Ruthann stepped into the kitchen. "Good morning," Vincent said, looking up from where he stoked the fire. "I see you found the eggs." His smile was warm, encouraging. "Yes." Ruthann set them carefully on the counter. "I thought maybe I could try making porridge." Vincent nodded, showing her where he kept the oats and flour. Her hands shook as she measured ingredients, and flour dusted the counter in white clouds. "I'm sorry," she stammered, reaching for a cloth. "No matter," Vincent said easily. "The flour knows its job is to make a mess sometimes." His gentle humor surprised a small laugh from her. But moments later, the porridge began to stick and smoke. Ruthann's heart raced as she rushed to lift the pot, remembering her father's anger over spoiled food. Instead of harsh words, Vincent simply helped her scrape the burned portions away. "The rest is perfect," he declared, spooning up a bite, just right for a morning's work. After the supper dishes were cleared that evening, Vincent brought out a well-worn leather Bible. The lamplight caught the gold-edged pages as he opened it carefully. "My mother gave me this before I left Pennsylvania," he explained. "Would you mind if I read?" Ruthann shook her head, settling into her chair. Vincent's voice filled the kitchen, his German accent lending a musical quality to the familiar words. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." She closed her eyes, remembering how her mother used to read these same verses. But that was before the shame, before her father's cruelty convinced her she was beyond God's love. Now the words washed over her like cool water, though her heart still doubted. The days began to take on a gentle rhythm. One clear afternoon, Vincent led her to the barn where his horse and buggy waited. "Would you like to learn?" he asked, holding out the reins. Ruthann hesitated. The horse was huge compared to her, but its soft brown eyes seemed kind. Vincent showed her how to hold the leather straps, explaining each command. His patience never wavered as she practiced, even when she pulled too hard and the horse snorted in protest. "There now," Vincent encouraged. "You're getting it." His steady presence at her shoulder made the task less daunting. The sound of approaching hoofbeats one afternoon made Ruthann look up from where she was hanging laundry. Mrs. Baker from the general store rode up, her face eager with gossip. "Land's sakes," the woman called out, not bothering to dismount. "The whole town's still talking about what your pa did, selling you like that. Never seen such a spectacle in all my days." Heat flooded Ruthann's cheeks. The sheet slipped from her trembling fingers, as old shame wrapped around her heart. Vincent stepped out of the barn, his voice firm but quiet. "Mrs. Baker, Ruthann is under my care now, and she deserves the respect due any daughter of God. I trust you'll remember that when sharing news in town." The woman's mouth opened, then closed. She muttered something about meaning no harm, and rode away. Ruthann stood frozen, the wet sheet forgotten at her feet. "Don't let her words trouble you," Vincent said gently. "What others think matters far less than what God knows to be true." That night, Ruthann knelt beside her bed in the loft. The words came slowly, rusty with disuse. "Dear God," she whispered, "I don't know if you still see me, but if you do, please give me strength. Help me believe I might be worth something after all." Crickets chirped their evening song outside as she climbed under the quilts. For the first time in years, peace settled over her like a familiar blanket. Maybe, just maybe, her life could hold more than shame. With that thought warming her heart, she drifted into peaceful sleep. The afternoon sun beat down on the farmyard as Ruthann hung the last of the washing on the line. A cloud of dust on the road caught her eye, and her heart stuttered as she recognized the rider, her father, sitting tall and angry in his saddle. He reined his horse to a stop, dust billowing around its hooves. "Girl," he bellowed, "get your things. You're coming home where you belong." Ruthann's fingers clutched the damp sheet, her knuckles white. Vincent emerged from the barn, his steady footsteps crossing the yard to stand beside her. Her father's face twisted. "This ain't none of your business, Amish. I've come for what's mine." "Ruthann is not property," Vincent said quietly. "She stays here of her own choice." "Harboring damaged goods, are you?" Her father spat on the ground. "That's what she is, worthless except for—" He cut himself off, his expression calculating. Vincent's voice remained calm. "I believe you sold any claim to her care for $1 silver. The law says different." Her father's eyes narrowed. "That girl's got ties to land and water rights through her mama. Proper documentation and all. Them rights stay in the family." Ruthann's breath caught. "What water rights?" she whispered. In all the years since her mother's death, he had never mentioned such a thing. "Your mama's family owned the springs up by Thunder Ridge," her father sneered. "And you ain't giving that away to no outsider." He wheeled his horse around. "I'll be back with papers. We'll see what the judge has to say about this arrangement." The horse's hooves kicked up dust as he galloped away. Ruthann's legs trembled. Vincent guided her gently to the porch steps, bringing her a cup of cool water. "I should have expected this," he said softly. "Water rights are more precious than gold out here, especially with the railroad pushing west. Every stream and spring will be needed." "I never knew," Ruthann said, her voice shaking. "Mama never told me about any springs." "Your father likely kept it quiet on purpose." Vincent sat beside her. "Those rights could be worth a fortune to the right buyers." Thunder rumbled in the distance as storm clouds gathered over the mountains. Ruthann wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the warm air. "What if he forces me to go back? I can't bear more shame, more cruel words." Vincent's hand covered hers, warm and strong. "Remember Joseph in Egypt? His brothers meant evil when they sold him, but God used it for good. Perhaps this situation is similar. How could any good come from such ugliness?" "The truth about your mother's legacy has come to light," Vincent said. "That's one good thing already. And," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "it has brought us together in common cause." Ruthann looked up at him, seeing the gentleness in his eyes. The oil lamp on the porch flickered as darkness crept in with the storm clouds. "I've never known such kindness before," she admitted softly. "Every day here, you treat me like I matter." "You do matter." Vincent's voice was firm. "Your worth is greater than gold or water rights or any earthly treasure. You are a daughter of the king, Ruthann. Nothing your father says can change that truth." Lightning flashed across the sky, followed by a loud crack of thunder. The first heavy drops of rain began to fall, drumming on the tin roof of the porch. Ruthann watched the storm roll in, thinking how it matched the conflict brewing in their lives. "We'll stand firm together," Vincent said, rising to secure the shutters against the wind. "Whatever your father tries, we face it with faith." Ruthann nodded, finding strength in his quiet confidence. The lamp's flame danced in the wind, casting warm light against the gathering gloom. Though her father's threats still echoed in her mind, she felt safer here on this humble porch than she ever had in her father's grand ranch house. The storm broke in earnest, rain sheeting down as lightning split the sky. Yet inside, Ruthann felt a curious peace. For the first time in her life, someone was willing to stand beside her, to fight for her dignity. The thought warmed her heart even as the wild weather raged around them. The storm lingered through the night and into morning, rain drumming steadily on the farmhouse roof. Ruthann woke early to the sound of water dripping into a tin bucket Vincent had placed beneath a leak in the kitchen ceiling. "Might need your help with the animals," Vincent called from the door, shrugging into his heavy coat. "Storms made quite a mess out there." Ruthann pulled on her boots and followed him into the gray morning. The barn door creaked as they entered, greeted by nervous snickering from the horses. Together, they moved through their tasks, Vincent forking fresh hay while Ruthann calmed the animals with gentle words and sure hands. "The roof's leaking here too," Vincent noted, pointing to water streaming through a gap in the boards. They worked side by side, positioning buckets and patching what they could with spare lumber. Stepping outside to fetch more supplies, Vincent's boots sank deep into the mud with a loud squelch. He wobbled, arms windmilling, before catching his balance. Ruthann couldn't help it. A small giggle escaped her lips. Vincent looked at her in mock offense, then smiled. "Think that's funny, do you?" His eyes twinkled with mischief. "Maybe a little," Ruthann admitted, her own smile growing wider. The sound of their shared laughter rose above the falling rain. Once the urgent repairs were finished, Vincent led her to a small plot behind the house, protected by the eaves. "My mother's herb garden," he explained softly. "She brought some of these plants all the way from Pennsylvania. I've tried to keep it up, but," he shrugged, "I fear I don't have her touch." Ruthann knelt beside the neat rows, her fingers gently touching the wet leaves. "Chamomile," she murmured. "And here's feverfew, and yarrow. My mama grew these too. She taught me how to dry them proper for healing teas." Vincent's eyes brightened. "Would you like to tend it? The garden should be more than just memories." "I'd love to," Ruthann said, her heart warming at the trust in his offer. She began pointing out different herbs, sharing what her mother had taught her about their uses. Vincent listened intently, adding stories of his own mother's remedies. As Sunday approached, Ruthann felt nervous about attending meeting in town. She hadn't been to church since her father's cruel display at the auction, but Vincent assured her of her place beside him. The little church was already full when their buggy arrived. Heads turned as they entered, and whispers followed them down the aisle. Ruthann caught fragments of cruel words about her size, making her cheeks burn. "Just look at her, taking up half the pew." Poor Vincent Yoder. But then she noticed other faces too. Mrs. Peterson nodding kindly, the baker's wife offering a smile, old Mr. Thompson tipping his hat respectfully. These simple gestures of acceptance eased the sting of the gossip. The preacher's sermon that morning seemed meant just for her. He spoke of God's mercy, how every soul was precious in His sight. "The Lord does not see as man sees," he declared, his voice ringing through the church. "Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." Ruthann felt tears prick her eyes. Vincent's hand found hers, offering a gentle squeeze. That evening, after a simple supper, Vincent disappeared into his workshop. When he returned, he held something behind his back. "Every woman should have a place for her treasures," he said, presenting her with a small wooden box. The wood was smooth and golden, carved with delicate flowers along the lid. Ruthann ran her fingers over the designs, touched beyond words. She hurried to her room and returned with something clutched in her hand, a faded pink ribbon, carefully preserved from her childhood. "Mama gave me this," she explained softly. "Said every little girl deserved something pretty." She placed the ribbon in the box, this symbol of love from her past joining her hope for the future. For the first time, she could imagine a life ahead that held more than shame and rejection. Here, in this simple farmhouse with its leaky roof and herb garden, she had found something she'd never dared dream of: belonging. Vincent watched her with gentle understanding, respecting her quiet moment with the box. Outside, the last drops of rain pattered on the roof, but inside, warmth and peace filled the room. Ruthann's heart felt full to bursting, with this new feeling of being valued, of having a place to call home. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, as Ruthann hung laundry behind the farmhouse. Sweat trickled down her neck, and the sheets snapped in the hot breeze. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her pause, shading her eyes against the glare. A sleek bay horse carried a well-dressed stranger up the dusty path. His dark suit and polished boots marked him as a city man, out of place among the simple farm buildings. Vincent emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers as he went to meet their visitor. "Mr. Yoder?" The stranger dismounted smoothly. "Thomas Blackwood, representing the Western Pacific Railroad Company." He extended a hand, which Vincent shook briefly. "Might we discuss some business matters?" Vincent gestured toward the porch, where a pitcher of cool water waited. "You're welcome to refresh yourself, Mr. Blackwood." Ruthann moved closer, pretending to focus on her laundry while listening intently. The stranger's cultured voice carried clearly in the still air. "We're surveying possible routes through this region," Blackwood explained, settling into a chair. "Water access is crucial for our steam engines. I understand there are several reliable springs on this property." Vincent's response was measured. "The springs lie partly on my land, yes, but water rights here are complex." "Indeed." Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Which brings me to my real purpose. I've been speaking with Abraham Miller about acquiring water rights in this area." Ruth Ann's hands froze on the sheet she was folding. Her father's name hit her like a physical blow. "Miller has proposed a mutually beneficial arrangement," Blackwood continued. "He's informed me of certain complications regarding his daughter's claim to inherited property. With the right legal maneuvers, he believes we can have her declared unfit to manage such valuable resources." Vincent's face hardened. "Miss Miller is under my protection now. Any discussion of her property rights should include her directly." "Ah, but that's where things become interesting." Blackwood leaned forward. "Mr. Miller suggests his daughter's mental capacity makes her unable to handle business matters. A judge might well agree, given her unusual circumstances." Ruth Ann stepped onto the porch, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. "My unusual circumstances, Mr. Blackwood, include being sold by my father at auction. I doubt that reflects well on his character before a judge." The railroad agent blinked, taken aback by her calm dignity. He recovered quickly, rising to his feet. "Well, I can see this requires further discussion. Good day to you both." He mounted his horse and rode away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Vincent turned to Ruth Ann, concern etched on his face. "Are you all right?" She nodded slowly, her mind racing. "I'm the only thing standing between Papa and those water rights. That's why he tried to be rid of me." A memory suddenly surfaced, sharp and clear. "Vincent, my mama's Bible. I remember seeing Papa hide it away with some important papers after she died. He never let me near it again." Vincent's eyes lit with understanding. "You think the deed might be there? Mama was careful about such things. She would have wanted to protect my inheritance." Ruth Ann twisted her apron in her hands. "The Bible might still be in Papa's study, with his documents. We'll need help to search without confronting him directly." Vincent paced the porch, thinking. "Sarah Watkins lives near your father's ranch. She might create a reason to visit, let you slip inside." "Yes," Ruth Ann agreed eagerly. She was Mama's friend. She'd understand. They stayed up late into the evening, planning carefully. Vincent cleaned and oiled his buggy harness, while Ruth Ann packed a basket with bread and preserves, gifts to make their visit to Mrs. Watkins seem natural. When morning came, Ruth Ann's stomach churned with anxiety as they hitched the horse. The thought of returning to her childhood home filled her with dread, but she forced herself to focus on their purpose. That Bible might hold the key to stopping her father's schemes. Vincent helped her into the buggy, his strong hand steady and reassuring. As they set off toward town, Ruth Ann breathed deeply of the fresh morning air. The familiar road brought back memories of years of loneliness and shame, but she was not that helpless girl anymore. She had found strength in Vincent's kindness and her own growing sense of worth. The buggy wheels turned steadily, carrying them closer to her past home, a place of pain, yes, but perhaps now also the source of her salvation. Ruth Ann straightened her shoulders, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The buggy wheels creaked steadily as Vincent guided their horse along the winding road. Ruth Ann watched the sun sink toward the western peaks, painting the clouds in shades of amber. By the time they reached Mrs. Keating's ranch, evening shadows stretched long across the yard. The widow's weathered farmhouse glowed with lamplight, smoke curling from the stone chimney. Mrs. Keating appeared on the porch, her silver hair neat beneath a dark shawl. "Land's sakes, if it ain't Vincent Yoder and young Ruth Ann. Come in, supper's just ready." The older woman's warm welcome eased some of Ruth Ann's tension. Inside, the kitchen smelled of fresh bread and beef stew. Mrs. Keating shooed them toward the table, already set with 3 places. "I heard what happened at the auction, Mrs. Keating said softly, ladling stew into bowls. "Your mama would have been heartsick to see it. She was a dear friend to me." Ruth Ann stirred her stew, gathering courage. "Mrs. Keating, did Mama ever speak to you about the spring on our land? About protecting it somehow?" The widow paused, spoon hovering. Matter of fact, she did. Near the end, when she was failing, Sarah talked about securing your future through scripture. I didn't understand then, but now. She shook her head. That woman was clever as they come. Hope fluttered in Ruth Ann's chest. Vincent reached over, squeezing her hand gently. They retired early. Mrs. Keating insisted they take her spare room while she slept in the kitchen alcove. Dawn found them back in the buggy, riding toward Ruth Ann's childhood home. Her stomach churned with each familiar landmark they passed. Vincent guided their horse into a grove of cottonwoods within sight of the ranch house. The leaves rustled overhead, helping to hide their presence. "I'll watch from here," he whispered. "Be careful." Ruth Ann crept toward the back of the house, her heart thundering. The kitchen door's familiar creak made her wince as she slipped inside. Morning light filtered through dusty windows, illuminating the room where she'd spent countless hours cooking and cleaning. Memories washed over her, harsh words, endless criticism, crushing loneliness. She forced them back, focusing on her task. Mother's old trunk still sat in the corner, its brass fittings dull with age. Kneeling beside it, Ruth Ann lifted the heavy lid. The scent of cedar and lavender rose from carefully folded linens. She dug deeper, hands trembling, until her fingers met leather binding. The family Bible lay wrapped in her mother's best tablecloth, just as she remembered. The back door banged open. Ruth Ann whirled to face her father, who stood swaying in the doorway. The sharp smell of whiskey filled the air. "Thieving little so," he slurred, face mottled with rage. "Come to root through your betters' belongings." He lurched forward, jabbing a finger at her. "Always were too big for your britches. A disgrace, that's what you are." Ruth Ann clutched the Bible to her chest, backing away. "These were Mama's things. She meant them for me. Give me that book." He lunged, grabbing for the Bible with clumsy hands. The kitchen door burst open as Vincent charged in. He positioned himself between Ruth Ann and her father, voice stern but steady. "Step back, Mr. Miller. We're leaving now." Interfering plain folk. Her father swung wildly, but Vincent dodged the blow. In the scuffle, Ruth Ann darted past them both, still holding the precious Bible. She ran for the cottonwood grove, hearing Vincent's boots right behind her. They reached the buggy just as her father stumbled onto the porch, shouting curses. Vincent helped her up, then slapped the reins. Their horse sprang forward, carrying them swiftly away. They didn't slow until they reached Mrs. Keating's ranch. The setting sun painted the western sky crimson as Vincent finally drew the horse to a stop. Ruth Ann hugged the Bible close, feeling its solid weight against her heart. Whatever secrets it held about the spring, she knew this book represented more than just water rights. It was her mother's final gift, a chance to claim her rightful place in the world. The lamp cast a warm glow across Mrs. Keating's kitchen table as Ruth Ann carefully opened her mother's Bible. Vincent sat close beside her, while Mrs. Keating worked quietly at her mending, giving them space but lending silent support. "Mama always read from Psalms," Ruth Ann whispered, her fingers trembling as she turned the well-worn pages. The familiar scent of leather and paper brought tears to her eyes. Vincent steadied her hand with his own. "Take your time, we're safe here." Page by page, they searched through the sacred text. Ruth Ann paused occasionally to read favorite passages her mother had marked. When they reached the book of Isaiah, something slipped from between the pages, a folded piece of parchment, yellow with age but carefully preserved. Ruth Ann's breath caught as she unfolded it. The formal script was clear, a deed to the natural spring and surrounding 10 acres, registered in her mother's maiden name. At the bottom, a note in her mother's familiar handwriting read, "For my daughter Ruth Ann, whose worth far exceeds water rights." Tears spilled down Ruth Ann's cheeks. Vincent squeezed her shoulder gently while Mrs. Keating set aside her sewing to fetch a handkerchief. "She knew," Ruth Ann whispered. "Mama knew he might try something like this. She protected me all along." She pressed the handkerchief to her eyes, overwhelmed by her mother's foresight and love. That night, kneeling beside Mrs. Keating's spare bed, Ruth Ann prayed with her whole heart. "Thank you, Lord, for watching over me, for saving these papers, for bringing me to Vincent, for showing me I'm not worthless after all." Morning found them back on the road to Vincent's homestead. The deed and Bible rode safely in Ruth Ann's lap, wrapped in one of Mrs. Keating's clean dish towels. As soon as they arrived home, Ruth Ann placed both treasures in the wooden box Vincent had carved for her. She ran her fingers over the simple but beautiful design, touched anew by his thoughtfulness. "No one will take them from you now," Vincent assured her, watching from the doorway. "You're safe here." Over the next few days, they fell into a gentle rhythm together. Vincent showed patience teaching Ruthann to milk his 2 cows, never minding when she struggled with the technique. "See here," he demonstrated, hands moving in steady rhythm. "Let the milk flow natural-like. Don't force it." Ruthann practiced until she got it right, beaming with pride when she finally filled a pail herself. In return, she shared her mother's wisdom about healing herbs and teas. "Chamomile soothes the spirit," she explained, carefully measuring dried flowers into cups one evening, "and peppermint aids digestion." Vincent sipped appreciatively. "Your mother taught you well. My own ma'am believed in herbal remedies too." They sat together by the hearth after supper, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls. Vincent stared into the flames, his expression distant. "I had a sweetheart once, back in Pennsylvania," he said softly. "Rebecca. She took ill with fever 5 years ago." He swallowed hard. "After she passed, I couldn't bear staying there. Too many memories. That's when I came west." Ruthann's heart ached for his loss. "You loved her very much." "I did. Thought I'd never want to marry after that." He turned to meet her eyes. "Never thought I'd find someone who made me feel hope again." Color warmed Ruthann's cheeks. She looked down at her hands folded in her lap. "I never thought anyone could want me," she admitted quietly. "Papa made sure I believed I was too big, too plain, too much of everything wrong." "He was cruel and wrong," Vincent said firmly. "You have a beautiful spirit, Ruthann. Any man would be blessed to have you as wife." Their eyes met in the firelight, something new and tender passing between them. Ruthann felt her heart flutter, while a gentle smile lifted the corners of Vincent's mouth. Her mother's Bible rested safely in its carved box nearby, a testament to love's protection and God's providence. They sat together in comfortable silence as the fire burned low, each lost in thought but finding peace in the other's presence. Their growing closeness felt as natural as sunrise, as steady as the seasons. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright as Ruthann and Vincent's buggy rolled into town. The white-painted church gleamed in the early light, its door open wide to welcome worshippers. Ruthann smoothed her plain brown dress, grateful for the careful mending Mrs. Keating had helped her do. Vincent helped her down from the buggy, his touch gentle and sure. "Ready?" he asked softly. She nodded, though her heart fluttered. Together they walked up the wooden steps, past whispers and sideways glances from other churchgoers. But something felt different today. The whispers held less venom, the glances more curious than cruel. Inside, they settled into a pew near the middle. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, making rainbow patterns on the floor. The familiar scent of beeswax candles and hymn books filled the air. As the congregation sang, Ruthann's clear voice rose sweet and true, drawing surprised looks from those nearby. Preacher Matthews stood to deliver his sermon, his kind eyes sweeping across the gathered faces. He spoke of love's transforming power, of seeing others as God sees them. Then he paused, smiling at Vincent and Ruthann. "We have witnessed something remarkable in our midst," he declared. "A union blessed by God himself, not just in law but in spirit." He gestured for them to stand. "Vincent Yoder and Ruthann Miller, please come forward." Ruthann's legs trembled as they walked to the front. Vincent's steady presence beside her gave her courage. "Here stands a woman clothed in humility and strength," the preacher announced, his voice carrying to every corner. "And here stands a man who sees with God's eyes, not man's judgment." Their marriage, though humble in beginning, shows us all what true Christian love can be. Tears welled in Ruthann's eyes as the preacher laid his hands on their joined ones. "May the Lord bless and keep you," he intoned. "May his face shine upon you and give you peace." "Amen," the congregation responded, and Ruthann felt something shift in the air, like ice melting in spring sunshine. After the service, several children gathered around her, drawn by her gentle smile, and the way she knelt to speak with them at their level. "Will you tell us a story, Mrs. Yoder?" a little girl asked shyly. "I'd love to," Ruthann answered, her heart warming at the new name. That evening, their small homestead buzzed with life. Mrs. Keating arrived first, bearing a fresh-baked pie. The Hendersons came next, then the Wilsons. Neighbors who had once turned away now sat at their table, sharing food and fellowship. Ruth Ann moved among her guests, serving coffee and pie, her cheeks glowing with joy. Laughter filled the rooms as Vincent told a story about his first attempt at milking a cow back in Pennsylvania. Mrs. Keating shared tales of frontier life, while Mr. Henderson praised Ruth Ann's cooking. "Never tasted better biscuits," he declared, reaching for another. As darkness fell, lanterns cast a warm glow over the gathering. Ruth Ann caught Vincent's eye across the room and saw her own happiness reflected there. For the first time in her life, she felt truly at home, truly valued. After the guests departed, Ruth Ann and Vincent sat contentedly by the fire. "Thank you," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "For what?" "For seeing more in me than I saw in myself." They retired to bed, peace settling over the house like a blanket. But outside, in the deep darkness beyond the lamplight, two figures crept closer to the homestead. Ruth Ann dreamed of her mother, of gentle hands and loving words. A sharp sound jolted her awake, the crack of breaking wood, then heavy footsteps. Before she could cry out, she heard the front door slam. Heart pounding, she scrambled from bed. Vincent was already up, rushing to light a lamp. They hurried to the main room where Ruth Ann kept her carved box. The lid stood open, contents scattered, and her mother's Bible was gone. "No," she gasped, dropping to her knees beside the box. "The deed." Through the open door, they heard horses' hooves pounding away into the night. Vincent ran outside, but the riders were already invisible in the darkness. Only the dust hanging in the air and the echo of hoofbeats proved they had been real. Ruth Ann stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself, shaking. The beautiful day's joy lay shattered around her like broken glass. Her father had stolen not just the deed, but her mother's precious Bible, her last connection to that gentle soul who had tried so hard to protect her. "What will we do?" she whispered as Vincent returned to her side. The night wind carried the sound of distant hoofbeats, growing fainter with each passing moment. Their brief peace had been torn away, leaving fear to fill the darkness. The rising sun painted the Colorado hills in shades of gold as Vincent knelt beside fresh hoofprints in the dirt. His keen eyes followed the trail leading toward town, noting where the horses had scattered gravel near the creek crossing. "They rode hard and fast," he said, standing up and brushing dust from his trousers. "I'm coming with you," Ruth Ann declared, already climbing onto their wagon seat. When Vincent started to object, she shook her head firmly. "That Bible was my mother's. I need to face this." Vincent nodded, understanding in his eyes. He clicked to their horse, and they set off along the rutted road into town. The morning air held a bite of autumn chill, making Ruth Ann pull her shawl tighter. As they approached Main Street, loud voices spilled from the Golden Nugget Saloon. Through the swinging doors, they could see Ruth Ann's father holding court at the bar, her mother's Bible clutched in his meaty hand as he gestured to a crowd of onlookers. "See here," he crowed, waving the Bible, "proof that the water rights belong to me. This German farmer thought he could buy my girl and steal my property." The railroad agent stood beside him, looking pleased in his fine suit. "Sheriff," he called out, "surely you can't allow such an unlawful transaction to stand. The man practically bought the girl like cattle." Ruth Ann's heart clenched at the cruel words, but she forced herself to walk through those doors, Vincent close behind. The saloon fell silent as they entered, morning sunlight streaming through dusty windows. Sheriff Taylor stepped forward, his weathered face troubled. "Vincent Yoder," he said slowly, "I'm afraid I need to take you into custody until a proper hearing can sort this out. There's been accusations of unlawful dealings." "No," Ruth Ann cried out. "Vincent saved me from cruelty. He showed me kindness when no one else would." The sheriff's eyes held sympathy, but his voice remained firm. "I'm sorry, miss, but only a judge can settle property disputes and questions of marriage legality. The circuit judge won't be here for 3 days." Vincent allowed himself to be led away, his dignity intact even as iron shackles closed around his wrists. Ruth Ann followed them to the jailhouse, watching through tears as the cell door clanged shut on the man who had given her hope. "Trust in God's plan," Vincent told her softly through the bars. "Your worth isn't measured by what men say about you." Mrs. Keating appeared then, wrapping a motherly arm around Ruth Ann's shoulders. "Come along, dear," she said gently. "You can stay with me until this is settled. We'll face it together." Back at Mrs. Keating's cozy house, the older woman poured tea and spoke words of encouragement. "You're stronger than you know, Ruth Ann. God doesn't give us burdens we can't bear with His help." "But how can I face them all?" Ruth Ann whispered. "The whole town will hear about my shame." "Sometimes speaking truth is the bravest thing we can do, Mrs. Keating replied. "Your mother knew that when she hid that deed to protect you." As evening settled over the land, Ruth Ann knelt beside her borrowed bed. The lamp's gentle glow reminded her of peaceful nights at Vincent's homestead, now so far away. She clasped her hands and bowed her head. "Dear Lord," she prayed, voice trembling, "give me courage to speak, help me stand against the lies. Show me how to fight for what's right, even when I'm afraid." She thought of her mother's Bible, how its pages had held not just scripture but her future. She thought of Vincent, alone in his cell, still believing in her strength. Something settled in her heart then, a determination that burned brighter than fear. Rising from her knees, Ruth Ann went to the window. The moon cast silver light over the sleeping town, and somewhere in that darkness, her father plotted with the railroad agent, but she would not hide anymore. When the judge arrived, she would testify. She would tell of her father's cruelty, of Vincent's kindness, of her mother's wisdom in protecting the spring. Just before midnight, Mrs. Keating walked with her to the jailhouse. The deputy, touched by their obvious distress, allowed them a few minutes' visit. Vincent stood as they approached his cell. Though bars separated them, his presence still brought comfort. No words were needed as they gazed at each other, their silent prayers rising together in the quiet night. Ruth Ann pressed her hand against the cold iron bars, and Vincent's larger one covered it from the other side. In that touch lay all their hopes for justice, all their dreams of a future together. Whatever came next, they would face it with faith and courage, trusting that truth would light their way through the darkness. The courthouse buzzed with whispers as morning sunlight streamed through tall windows. Ruth Ann sat beside Mrs. Keating in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Vincent stood in chains near his lawyer, but his bearing remained dignified despite his imprisonment. Judge Harrison, a silver-haired man with keen eyes, called the room to order. The sharp crack of his gavel echoed through the packed chamber, silencing the murmurs. Dust motes danced in the morning light, as Ruth Ann's father strode forward, her mother's Bible clutched in his grip. "Your Honor," he declared, holding the Bible aloft, "this here proves my claim to the spring. The deed's inside, clear as day, and that German had no right to purchase my daughter or meddle with my property." The railroad agent stepped forward in his fine suit, hat held respectfully in his hands. "If I may speak, Your Honor, this region needs progress. Mr. Miller has agreed to grant essential water rights for the railroad's expansion. Surely the court sees the greater good at stake." Judge Harrison's expression remained neutral as he listened. Around the courtroom, townsfolk shifted in their seats. Some nodded at the mention of progress, while others frowned at the memory of Ruth Ann's public humiliation. "The court will hear from Miss Miller," the judge announced, his voice carrying to the rafters. "Young lady, do you wish to speak in your own defense?" Ruth Ann's heart hammered against her ribs as she slowly rose. Her legs trembled, but she forced herself to stand straight. The weight of every eye in the room pressed upon her, yet she found strength in Vincent's steady gaze. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, her voice starting soft but growing stronger. "I must speak of what happened that day at the auction block." Taking a deep breath, she described the cruel moment when her father had offered her up like livestock. "I felt less than human," she admitted, her words falling into the hushed room. "But Vincent Yoder saw me as a daughter of God. He showed me kindness when others turned away." As she spoke, faces in the crowd began to change. Mrs. Thompson, the baker's wife, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Old Mr. Peterson, who had known her mother, nodded slowly in recognition of the truth. "That Bible belonged to my mother," Ruth Ann continued, her voice steady now. "She taught me about healing herbs and God's love while reading from those very pages. And I can prove it's truly hers." With trembling fingers, she reached into her pocket and withdrew a faded blue ribbon. The silk was worn soft with age, its edges frayed, but the color still bright enough to stir memories. "My mother always marked her place with this ribbon," Ruth Ann explained. "She tied it to me for my first day of school, then kept it as a bookmark ever after. The Bible's cover has a small tear where she would tuck it in, right here." She stepped forward, showing the judge the distinctive mark in the leather binding. Her father's face had grown pale, his confident smirk faltering as whispers rippled through the courthouse. "I remember that ribbon," Mrs. Anderson called out from the gallery. "Your mother wore it to church socials before you were born." "And I recall her reading from that Bible at the schoolhouse," added Mr. Peterson. "Always kept it marked with that very ribbon, she did." Ruth Ann's father shifted uneasily, his lies beginning to unravel before the community's shared memories. The railroad agent tugged at his collar, looking less certain of their position. Judge Harrison examined the Bible carefully, noting the worn spot that matched the ribbon perfectly. His expression remained stern as he turned to address the court. "I will review the deed and all evidence presented today," he announced. "This matter requires careful consideration of both property rights and human dignity. I shall deliver my ruling tomorrow morning." The gavel struck once more, its sharp report like thunder in the silent room. As the bailiff led Vincent back toward the jail, his eyes met Ruth Ann's. In that glance passed all their hopes for justice, all their dreams of a future where love might triumph over greed. Ruth Ann clutched her mother's ribbon, drawing strength from its familiar touch and the truth it represented. The courthouse slowly emptied, leaving Ruth Ann standing in a shaft of sunlight. She had spoken her truth at last, giving voice to years of silent pain. Whatever the judge decided, she knew she had honored both her mother's memory and her own worth. The ribbon in her hand was more than proof of ownership. It was a thread connecting past to present, binding together all she had lost and all she dared to hope for. The autumn sun had long since set when Mrs. Keating lit the oil lamp in her cozy parlor. Ruth Ann knelt beside her bed, hands clasped in prayer, her mother's faded ribbon pressed between her palms. The familiar scent of pine wood and fresh-baked bread filled the house, bringing comfort to her anxious heart. "Lord," she whispered, "grant me strength for whatever tomorrow brings." Sleep proved elusive that night. Before dawn, Mrs. Keating insisted Ruth Ann eat a hearty breakfast of cornbread and eggs. "You need your strength, child," she said, patting Ruth Ann's hand. "Whatever happens, you spoke truth yesterday." They stopped at the jail on their way to the Obese courthouse. Vincent stood as Ruth Ann approached the iron bars, his face brightening at her presence. "I watched you yesterday," he said softly, his German accent thick with emotion. "You showed such courage, speaking before all those people." Ruth Ann blushed, ducking her head. "I was terrified." "No." Vincent reached through the bars to touch her hand. "You are my true partner, Ruth Ann. Whatever the judge decides, I am proud to stand beside you." His words wrapped around her heart like a warm blanket. The deputy called that it was time to go. But Vincent's proud smile stayed with her as they walked the short distance to the courthouse. The morning air held the crispness of early fall as people filed into the wooden building. Ruth Ann's father slouched in the front row, refusing to meet her eyes. The railroad agent sat beside him, looking confident despite yesterday's revelations. At precisely 9 o'clock, Judge Harrison entered. His black robes rustled as he took his seat, adjusting his spectacles before surveying the crowded room. "I have reviewed the evidence presented yesterday with great care," he began, his voice carrying to the rafters. "This case touches on matters of both property and human dignity." The room fell so quiet, Ruth Ann could hear the tick of the wall clock. Her hands trembled in her lap as the judge continued. Miss Miller's testimony, supported by the physical evidence of her mother's Bible and ribbon, along with the sworn statements of respected townspeople, establishes her rightful inheritance of the spring in question. A low murmur rippled through the courthouse. Judge Harrison raised his hand for silence. "Furthermore, I find that her father has no legal claim to this property, nor can he negotiate its sale to the railroad or any other party. The deed clearly shows her mother's intention to pass ownership directly to her daughter." The railroad agent's face darkened as he scribbled furiously in his notebook. Ruth Ann's father seemed to shrink in his seat, his earlier arrogance crumbling. "Sheriff," the judge commanded, "release Mr. Yoder immediately. This court finds no evidence of wrongdoing on his part." The sheriff hurried from the room as Judge Harrison continued. "Let it be recorded that Miss Ruth Ann Miller is the sole legitimate owner of the spring and surrounding acres as detailed in the deed. This court's ruling is final." The sharp crack of his gavel echoed through the chamber. People began talking at once, their voices rising in excitement. The railroad agent gathered his papers, and stormed from the room, his expensive boots clicking against the wooden floor. Ruth Ann stood slowly, her legs unsteady. Across the aisle, her father remained seated, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Something moved her feet forward until she stood before him. "Father," she said softly. He flinched at her voice, but didn't look up. "I forgive you," Ruth Ann whispered, her heart full of a mercy she hadn't known she possessed. Her father's hands clenched in his lap. He made no response, couldn't meet her eyes. But she saw a tear splash onto his weathered knuckles. The courthouse door opened, and Vincent strode in, free of chains. His face glowed with joy as he crossed the room to Ruth Ann's side. Without hesitation, he took her hand in his, their fingers intertwining naturally. Around them, neighbors who had once whispered cruel words now smiled and offered congratulations. Mrs. Thompson hurried forward to embrace Ruth Ann. Old Mr. Peterson clapped Vincent on the shoulder. Even the sheriff nodded respectfully as he passed. "You showed them who you truly are," Vincent murmured, squeezing her hand. "Not a burden, but a woman of strength and grace." Ruth Ann looked around the courtroom, seeing warmth in faces that had once held only judgment. Her father still sat alone, surrounded by the wreckage of his reputation, but she felt no triumph in his downfall, only peace that justice had prevailed. The morning sunlight streamed through the high windows, catching the dust motes in golden rays. Ruth Ann stood tall beside Vincent, her heart full of gratitude. In this moment of victory, she had found not just her voice, but her place in the community. The whispers around her now spoke not of shame, but of admiration for the quiet dignity with which she had claimed her inheritance and offered forgiveness. The autumn days grew shorter, as Ruth Ann and Vincent settled back into life at the homestead. Together they mended broken windows and repaired splintered door frames left by the intruders. Vincent's steady hands worked the wood while Ruth Ann mixed paint, their quiet industry healing more than just the physical damage. "We'll make it stronger than before," Vincent said, fitting a new latch to the front door. Word spread through the community of their victory in court. Soon wagons began arriving, carrying neighbors bearing gifts. Mrs. Thompson brought a carefully folded quilt in shades of blue and cream. The Peterson boys lugged wooden crates, filled with seed potatoes and corn kernels. Old Widow Jenkins offered her late husband's set of farming tools, saying they would serve better in young hands. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," she told Ruth Ann, patting her arm. "Sometimes what starts in darkness ends in light." Near the spring that had caused such strife, Ruth Ann and Vincent marked out neat rows for a vegetable garden. The soil was rich and dark, promising abundant harvests. As Vincent turned the earth, Ruth Ann scattered seeds, each one a prayer for new beginnings. "This water will nourish more than just our crops," she said softly. "It can be a blessing to others too." One evening, as the sun painted the sky in amber and rose, children's laughter echoed across the yard. The Miller twins and young Sally Jenkins had come visiting, drawn by stories of Ruth Ann's gentle ways. They gathered on the porch steps, eyes bright with wonder, as Ruth Ann began to sing. Her voice, once silenced by shame, rose clear and strong in an old hymn her mother had taught her. Vincent leaned against the doorframe, watching. Pride glowed in his eyes. As the children swayed to the melody, their small faces upturned in joy. Later, as they sat by lamplight, Ruth Ann shared the dream growing in her heart. "There are so many orphans passing through," she said. "Children with no family, no home. Perhaps we could offer them shelter here." Vincent nodded slowly. "The house needs more rooms," he mused. "But with God's help, we could build them." That night, they stepped outside to admire the stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. Ruth Ann's heart swelled with gratitude for how far she had come from that terrible day at the auction block. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, "for making something beautiful from my pain." Vincent's warm hand found hers in the darkness. "You know," he said softly, "I prayed for years for God to send me a treasure. Now I see He had you in mind all along." Ruth Ann squeezed his fingers, tears of joy glinting in her eyes. Together they gazed at their small homestead, no longer just a house but a beacon of hope taking shape under the vast Colorado sky. Months flowed like the steady spring water, each season bringing new life to the homestead. Summer faded into autumn, painting the valley in rich golds and deep reds. The house that had once stood lonely now bustled with warmth and activity. Travelers learned to look for the weathered sign Vincent had carved. Rest here, water and welcome. Some came dusty and weary from the trail, leading thirsty horses. Others arrived on foot, carrying all they owned in small bundles. Each found the same greeting, Ruth Ann's gentle smile, and a dipper of cool water from the spring. "The Lord provides," she would say, ladling out bowls of hearty stew. "There's always room for one more at our table." Word spread through wagon trains and mining camps of the kind woman at the homestead with the sweet spring. Children especially gravitated to her, drawn by the warmth in her eyes and the songs she would sing while working. Even the most fearful little ones would creep closer when she hummed, their faces softening at her melodic voice. "She's like them goddesses of mercy in them old stories," old Jim Thompson remarked one day to his wife. "Always got a gentle word and helping hand." Ruth Ann would blush at such words, shaking her head. "It's not me," she would insist. "It's God's grace flowing through, same as that spring water." The homestead flourished under their care. Vincent's skilled hands had expanded the house, adding rooms for orphans who needed shelter. The vegetable garden thrived, its bounty feeding many beyond their own table. Ruth Ann's herbs grew in neat beds, providing remedies for travelers' ailments. Their love deepened with each passing day, shown in small gestures, Vincent's hand steadying her as she carried water, Ruth Ann's smile catching his eye across the fields. They worked in comfortable harmony, whether mending fences or teaching young ones to read by lamplight. On this particular autumn evening, the long table Vincent had crafted stretched across their yard, laden with harvest bounty. Lanterns cast a golden glow over the gathering, neighbors, travelers, and the 3 orphan children they had taken in. 8-year-old Mary helped Ruth Ann pass cornbread while Tommy, not quite 6, proudly carried the butter he had helped churn. Little Sarah, barely 4, clung to Ruth Ann's skirts, slowly warming to the company. The spring gurgled softly nearby, its sound mixing with laughter and conversation. Mrs. Keating shared stories of early settlement days, while Mr. Peterson discussed crop rotation with Vincent. Children darted between adults, playing games in the deepening dusk. Ruth Ann paused in serving to survey the scene, her heart full. These faces around her table, once strangers, now family. The same townspeople who had witnessed her shame at the auction block, now sought her counsel and friendship. God had indeed worked mysteries with her life. As night settled over the valley, and neighbors began to head home with warm farewells, Vincent drew Ruth Ann aside. They stood together on the porch, watching lantern lights bob away into darkness. "What your father cast away," Vincent whispered, his arms encircling her, "God raised up." Ruth Ann leaned into his embrace, smiling at their lamplit homestead. Through the windows, she could see Mary helping Sarah prepare for bed, while Tommy carefully arranged his beloved collection of rocks on the windowsill. The house glowed with life and love, every corner filled with the peace she had once thought forever beyond her reach. Her father's cruel words had long lost their power. In their place lived countless moments of kindness, children's trust, neighbors' respect, travelers' gratitude, and Vincent's steadfast love. Here, at last, was the belonging her heart had always sought. "Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe and tomorrow, I'll bring you another story crafted with heart."